Hi everyone, and I'm very sorry it's been such a long time since my last video, but it's been a very busy period for me. But I'm back finishing off my Richard Laymon short story collections, which means today I'm doing Dreadful Tales, his collection from the year 2000, the year before he died. Let me get straight into it. There's Steve Crisp's fantastic cover art as always, but also as always, I really regret that in these later editions they would squish the image up so much because it's such a waste, really, of the effort that he's put into it. You lose by making his name so needlessly massive. You've lost so much of the fantastic detail. You know, this creepy little figure there peering out from the spooky window. The detail in the trees. Steve Crisp was always fantastic at depicting branches, making them look like, claws or like spindly spider legs or something like that. Even here, this looks a little bit like a torso to me with a skull there. Really good. So yeah, as always, great work by Steve Crisp. I'm not going to bother reading the back on this one because it's a collection of short stories, so it just does what short story collections usually do. It's a bunch of generic introduction about the spookiness to come. So straight on with the stories then. As with my previous Laymon short story video, Fiends, I marked them out of 10. And what does that ranking mean? It means that I've marked them as Richard Laymon works. I'm not comparing them to anyone else other than Laymon himself, because I don't think Laymon ever wrote a short story, which will be anthologized 100 years from now, even 50 years from now, whereas, King did and has, and Barker has, and Dean Koontz has, actually. Laymon hasn't done that. He's not a writer for the ages. He never tried to be a writer for the ages. He was a writer who tried to make you have a damn good time in the moment, and that's all he ever offered, and it's what he did offer up. So yeah, my ranking is about how they rank as Richard Laymon works. Right, let me get straight on with it then. And spoilers ahead, because as I also said in my Fiends review, there is no point at all in reviewing a short story collection without talking about the stories, without the plot. Otherwise, what am I going to say? Some of these stories are like 5 pages long. All I could do is say, yeah, it's a good one, and go on to the next one. What's the point of that? So, if you haven't read these stories, do so and then return to this video. Alright, well, it begins with a preface, a short 3-page preface, which is basically him saying how much he dislikes prefaces and forewords. He doesn't like reading them, much less writing them. He likes to know nothing about a story or a book before he goes into it. It's fair enough. But the preface is worth reading just because it shows his very self-aware sense of humor. He talks about his choice of the title Dreadful Tales, the connotations of the word dreadful, because Laymon wasn't the most literary writer in the world, and he never tried to be. It's what I love about him, his complete lack of pretentiousness, So, yeah, the preface is worth a read, but then straight onto the story's Invitation to Murder. It's a strong opening. I've given it an 8 out of 10. It concerns someone, a writer, she's writing a story for an anthology, and the premise of each story has to be that it involves a 22-year-old woman being killed. So you got to write a story about that. And you kind of know going into it that in some way the writer, him or herself, is going to end up in that situation, either as the person being killed or the killer. But it's not as predictable as you would first think, and I did enjoy the ending very much. Kind of a twist ending. It relies very much on the very last sentence, actually, to really get all that's gone on there. It's well told, and what I love about this, maybe I like this story more than most readers would, because I'm a huge fan of his novel The Stake. It finished 3rd in my ranking video, and one of the reasons I love The Stake is because it offers a window into Laymon's craft, into how he writes. And this does too, even though the writer in this story isn't exactly him, whereas in Stake it clearly is exactly him. Nevertheless, we do get to see how Laymon comes up with ideas, how he wrestles with them, how he works them out, how his thought process, how he jots them down. So yeah, I love any kind of window into an artist's craft, and this offered it for me. So a very good opening, 8 out of 10. Next up comes The Grab, one of his earliest stories. Yeah, Laymon is very good at the type of story that involves people passing through some out-of-the-way Californian town, and then they happen upon like a bar, a saloon, something like that, and something odd is going on inside, or they get caught up in an odd story. This is one of those. It's very well told. It's kind of skin-crawling in some parts. It's a nasty little idea. I liked it. And it's an odd little thing I noticed going through the bibliographical information. It's that Some of the best stories in this anthology were written before he was a published novelist. His first novel, The Cellar, was published in 1980. And some of the stories that have got 7s, 8s, and 9s were written in the mid-70s. There's a real economy of style back then when he was learning his craft. There's none of the superfluous like sex scenes that he would throw into his 90s work and his late 80s work. Yeah, The Grab is an example of what I'm talking about. It's just a really fast, well-told story with no wasting of words, none of the distracting Laymonisms that would come in 10 or 20 years later. Next comes Saving Grace, which is an example of what I've just said, the superfluous sex stuff, because I wasn't a fan of this one. I've given it a 5. There's another story later on called The Good Deed, which is almost a carbon copy of this. It's 2 teenage boys who happen upon a beautiful young woman in the woods. I think she was naked. She's tied to a tree. Obviously, a psychopath has brought her there, and he's ready to do all kinds of horrible things to her. So the 2 horny teenage boys, they face the usual Richard Laymon dilemma. Should we help her and free her, or should we molest her ourselves? And yeah, if you've, like me, you've read every single one of Laymon's novels, and you're very familiar with his style and his quirks and his literary mannerisms, let's say, then this offers nothing, because it's just horniness and sex and violence and wildly improbable behavior from all involved, but especially the damsel in distress. So yeah, nothing. If you've never read a word of Laymon and you came across this in a magazine or in an anthology, you might think, well, that's weird, because really, honestly, no one else wrote quite like him. But to us Laymon aficionados, it's far from weird. It's very, very mundane for him. Next up, Barney's Bigfoot Museum. I like the setting of it. And again, a little bit of a twist at the end. You're led to believe that Barney there is bagged Bigfoot, but it's something else. Yeah, not a lot to say about this one. It's just a good read, giving it a 6. Herman is next, and 5, similar to Saving Grace there. Too much unnecessary sex. The idea itself isn't bad. It's this young girl, I think she was 16, maybe younger, but certainly not an adult, who has an imaginary friend who she names Herman. And this girl is attacked one time, and she wonders why her imaginary friend isn't coming to help her, but it turns out that he was just getting off on her sexual attack. One thing leads to another. She ends up killing the guy and drenching Herman in blood so that she can see his form, his outline. And this is one of 3 stories in this collection to culminate in the 2 people at the end licking a stranger's blood off themselves and having sex. I just didn't like it for the same reason I just said about Saving Grace. It's lots of silly sex, and as always, it involves an underage girl partaking in these things. I guess he had to make her a child because adults don't really have imaginary friends, but yeah, didn't do anything for me. Next up comes The Champion. We're giving this a 6, and this is similar to The Grab in the sense that it's a person passing through a Californian town, goes into a bar, and there's some odd stuff going on in there. In this case, the odd stuff is this bar operates a kind of ultimate fighting championship situation where you are obliged to fight the champion, the reigning champion, to the death. And only by doing that will you be allowed to, it seems, to have your freedom. But it turns out that that's not the case, because if you do beat him, you become the next champion, and obviously the cycle goes on. A weird, funny little idea. I liked it. It's well told. Nothing especially mind-blowing, so I've just given it a 6. The Maiden comes in next, and I've given it a 7. In brackets, I've put Island there to remind myself that the novel Island. I like this story, The Maiden, because it reminds me in some ways of that novel in terms of the guy in it, like Rupert in Ireland. At the very, very, very end, we find out that he's a bit sick and twisted in ways we didn't initially think he was. The same here. The same happens with the protagonist here, or antagonist, I guess. I really liked the setup of this. 2 teenage boys come to their nerdy, geeky third boy, a classmate of theirs, and they convince him that a beautiful girl from their school is really into him. She wants to meet him in the dead of night. So he's gullible, he believes it. And so they drive off to this lake, and they tell him that she's waiting for him out on an island in the middle of the lake. But they also tell him a legend of the Maiden, this female who dwells within the lake, who tries to capture anyone who tries to make it to the lake. So he's faced with that dilemma. He really wants this girl because he's a Richard Laymon horny teenager. But to get to her, he's got to put himself, it looks like, in danger. Good twists, good turns, really likes the ending. Thinking more about it, now that I've just described the plot, I'm remembering reading it and how much fun I had. And I don't know why if I given it a 7. Maybe elevate that to an 8 because I did enjoy it a lot. So anyway, next up, a good cigar is a smoke. 6. I expected more of this. First time I'd read it, and I know that this is the title. I think it's the title of a collection, a short limited edition anthology put out, which led me to believe it was something special to him, something he really likes. But yeah, it's nothing special. A woman just hates the fact that her guy smokes cigars and he ends up getting torched by it. You know, 6-7 pages long, nothing much to it. Next up, I Am Not a Criminal, a 5. The second of the stories that ends with the two people who in the beginning seem normal licking off each other the blood of a guy they've just murdered. Laymon was never big on hygiene. The setup is good. It's one of his hitchhiker stories. Laymon has a bunch of hitchhiker stories. Husband and wife driving through California, as always. They go firstly to this, I don't remember what it is, but it's a real tourist attraction, this huge tree that you can drive through. And there's a hitchhiker who keeps trying to flag them down. They keep ignoring him, and he's holding a sign saying, "I'm not a criminal." Eventually, they do pick him up. Obviously, it turns out that he very much is a criminal, but the driver and his wife are every bit as sick as he is, or rather the wife is, and they turn the tables. It's all right. I just, again, wish it hadn't had that shoehorned in sex stuff at the end. Well, the sex stuff actually isn't so bad in this story. It's the fact that the wife is butchering this guy, like slicing his jugular vein, bathing herself in the geyser of his blood. And the husband's getting off on it, and then they like cover themselves in his blood and start having sex and stuff like this. It's just a tad improbable. But anyway, like I said, if you've never read a word of Laymon before, you came across this in an anthology, you might think that this is something really strange because no one else really wrote this kind of thing, probably for good reason. But right, next up is Oscar's Audition. I've given this a 9. Wrestled with the idea of giving it a 10. It's pretty much a perfect story. It's one of his. It's such a well-constructed revenge story about a guy who. So he sees this guy Oscar in a bar, and he makes him a proposition that Oscar has just gotten out of prison, and the guy, the nameless guy, the narrator, I think it was. I don't know if it's first or third person, but he offers him to get back on his feet by being I think it was a getaway driver in a crime that he's about to do. But to test Oscar, he tells him to go rob a convenience store first so he can see how he handles pressure and stuff like that. It looks like it's going to be a very simple story, but I thought the ending was fantastic when we find out who the guy is, the guy who's giving Oscar's audition, who Oscar is, why he's doing this. It's a short one. It's like 8-9 pages, but it's perfection by Laymon standards, so maybe I should have given it a 10. Into the Pit, another 9. I've kind of already spoken about this story because in my review of his novel Amara, I had said that for whatever reason, when they were cobbling that novel together after his death, they decided to take this short story and just shoehorn it in there with a few changes, but not many. But as a standalone story, it is fantastic. It's the only story in this collection which creeped me out, which spooked me. It's the only story in this collection which made me feel some kind of horror. You know, Laymon isn't really horror. He's entertaining. I at least am never frightened by his work because it's so fantastical. But yeah, I don't know. This is such an awful idea, and I also enjoyed the style, similar to his novel Savage, which finished number 1 in my anthology, in my ranking video. He's done something a bit different here. He's trying to write in a different voice. He's trying to write in an older, because it's set in the 1920s. So it shows that when he wanted to, he could be a different kind of writer. He was able to actually be a skilled, gifted, literary, almost, writer. So a really great one, Into the Pit. Spooked comes in next. Tiny story, 4 or 5 pages. I've given it an 8. Cool idea. Guy tries to off his woman. He thinks he's being creative in the way he's done it. she's every bit a match for him. She's turns the tables. Right, the good deed, I've already kind of mentioned it because it's similar to Saving Grace. This wastes such a fantastic setup. Two horny young teenage boys, Richard Laymon characters to a T. They happen upon a woman in the woods, the same as Saving Grace, but this time it's a woman in a cage. And what a fantastic idea. Bizarre, weird. But anyway, yeah, a beautiful woman asleep or unconscious in a metal cage right in the middle of the woods. Who is she? How did she get there? Who brought her there? What will happen? All of those intriguing questions that the beginning sets off in your mind. None of them are answered. None of them are answered at all. The boy, it's long, this story. It's like 30 pages almost. And the boys just toy with her. They obsess over how she looks. They get her to strip naked. They want to have sex with her. One of them wants to rape her. It ends in the most ridiculous fashion, with her decide they do free her, and then she decides to become their sex slave or partner for a while before they all go their separate ways. It's similar to, it was written roughly the same in the mid-90s, when Laymon was in his slump, and he was writing stuff like Body Rides, which was just teenage sex fantasies stretched out to 500 pages. Yeah, and I wasn't a fan of that one at all. The direct approach is more of a comedy thing. It's a jokey one. I liked it. It's got a funny little twist. A guy knocks on a woman's door offering, in very smooth, euphemistic language, but basically he's a hitman. He's offering an assassin service. As he says, everyone's got someone they want to kill. And I thought that was going to be it. But no, at the end there's a funny little twist to it. So not bad, a 6. Good Vibrations, giving it a 7. This is the strangest thing Laymon ever wrote. A very rare example of Laymon dabbling in the supernatural. It's pretty long, 20 pages. For him, that's a long short story. Yeah, we had a woman on a beach sunbathing, and some weird sand creature gets her under the sands. At first, she's sexually attracted to it, but then she realizes it's evil intent. It's weird. I mean, it's so rare for Laymon to do something like this. So for that reason, I've given it a 7, just because it's something very unusual for him. I didn't especially like it, but kudos to him for breaking away from the usual kind of just psychopathic killer story. Phil the Vampire gets a 6 because it starts well. I like the setting and the I like the dialogue between the private eye and the woman. I thought this was going to be a rare example of Laymon being a bit metaphorical. I thought this was going to be a kind of a story with some subtext about delusion and how people can be made to believe the improbable so easily. Maybe there is some of that in it, but in the second half of the story, he abandoned all of that, and it just becomes a very predictable ending when we find out that, oh, actually there is a vampire. So nothing special there. Paying Joe Back, another one of his very early stories from the mid-70s, given it a 7. I've read a story like this by someone else, but I can't think who. It's no one famous. It's not one of the big ones. But yeah, woman comes into a bar, says to the guy behind the bar, "Where's Joe?" Joe's the owner of the bar. "I'm going to kill him. He betrayed me some years ago." So the barman thinks quickly we find out his father, Joe, out of being killed. It's all right. Next up, The Fur Coat 3. God, I hated this. But again, it started well. It showed a surprising literary bent, because Laymon, I mean, was coming up with some pretty insightful comments here on the nature of grief and grieving. And I thought this was going to be kind of a literary story, similar to, what's that Stephen King story in Night Shift towards the end? Is it The Woman in the Room, where pretty much nothing happens, but it's a meditation on death and grief? It isn't. It's just a woman who, the only thing she still keeps as a memory of her dead husband is the fur coat that he gave her. It's her pride and joy. And she goes to the theatre one night, and she's just accosted by some animal rights activists who kill her and tear her up like they imagine animals are torn up. Stupid. I didn't get it at all. I don't get what the point of it was, unless it's just Laymon like mocking militant animal rights activists. but I mean, that's a pretty easy target, and I don't think it needed a 15-page story to do it. But whatever, I mean, so a 3, the worst thing in the book, the worst short story he wrote, I think. Blarney is next, a 4. It's just predictable. You know, a couple, actually, they're not a couple. They seem to be partners in crime. A guy and a girl just driving through California, as always. There's a castle up on a hill. They go to it. The guy wants to bump off the woman. When they get to the castle on the hill, there's a strange guy there who tells them that this is like the American version of the castle in Ireland where the Blarney Stone is. He tells me if you kiss the stone, you'll never grow old. And as soon as he said that, I understood, okay, so he's going to kill him, and that's what he does. Simple and very predictable. Drakuson's Driver, giving it a 6. This is good for the setting. I like stories that are set in motels or hotels. Again, though, a tad predictable, but it's fine. Roadside Pickup, 9. This is one of his earliest stories again, and it follows the pattern of the earliest stories are the best ones here. This is also from the mid-70s. Absolutely loved it. Very similar to Oscar's Audition. This is kind of a revenge story. So a woman's sister was raped and murdered on a highway one time when her car broke down. So now we jump ahead, and the same thing seems to have happened to her sister. She's also broken down in the same stretch of road, and it looks like history's going to repeat itself, but it doesn't, and we find out why this woman is in that situation. I thought it was brilliant. And again, similar, I don't know why I didn't give it a 10. I probably should have, because I can't fault anything in it. And it again shows the economy of style that he had in the mid-70s before he became more confident, more comfortable, in a good and a bad way. In the bad way that he would start just putting in all these endless, tedious descriptions of sex and stuff. Really, really, really good story. Wishbone is next, giving it a 6. The second, I think, story here to deal with the supernatural. An arguing newlywed couple are hiking in the woods. They're bickering all the time. The husband's a complete idiot and just a very nasty person, so the wife storms off. But eventually they get reconciled, and the wife notices up in a tree is a skeleton. And that skeleton ends up coming alive and dealing with the husband for her. It's all right. Next up, First Date, giving it a 4. The third story to involve people licking blood off each other. Yeah, boring, tedious, long, 25 pages. Yeah, nothing to say about it. Young people go to a cemetery on a first date. The girl's kind of freaky. She wants to start cutting each other and drinking their blood because she's obsessed with vampires. The story ends, you know, ambiguously. Is she actually a vampire or not? But by that point, I was just bored to tears by all the boring sex stuff, so I tuned out. Next up, Stickman, an 8. This was good. This was weird. 4 friends driving through a cornfield. This doesn't seem to have been set in California for once. Driving through a cornfield, and there's a scarecrow, and one of the guys tells the legend of this scarecrow, how it came to be. As most scarecrow horror stories tend to be, it involves someone who was killed for various reasons and then was planted in the field to act as a scarecrow. And they dare one of the women to go over and steal his hat. It had a pretty unpredictable ending. I didn't see it going this way, and it's just an image that I won't forget. The image of the scarecrow, well, it's not a scarecrow, but I mean the skeleton dressing itself in the flesh of this woman and like lumbering around with her torso and her legs and stuff like that. Bizarre, really weird. After Good Vibrations, I'd say it's the strangest story here. So I enjoyed it. And then last comes Mop Up, which I've given a 9 to. This is a long short story. It's 50 pages, and I think that's the longest short story Laymon ever wrote. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's an infected story. It deals with the aftermath of a virus that's been loosed upon, it seems, the world, but at least America, which has turned everyone into these raving lunatics. The virus is called the Black Widow virus because it makes people become sexually rapacious zombies who want to rape and then murder and then eat their victims. It could have just called it the Richard Laymon virus, because that's pretty much what all of his characters want to do anyway. But the Black Widow virus has turned America into this wasteland, and I liked it a lot. At first, I was a bit iffy on it. I didn't see where I was going. I was a bit confused by it all. But once I got into it, 5 or so pages in, I was pretty wrapped. And I like even though it's a very brief tale, there's a pretty effective romance story at the heart of this. And I enjoyed the ending as well. It's one of his open-ended endings, similar to Stephen King's The Mist, the book version of The Mist. In that you're left wondering, so what was the reality here? Was the guy infected or not? Has he just died for nothing? Laymon is making a funny little commentary here on how lust turns people into, it looks like, infected maniacs. For him, I thought it was a cool story. I wasn't expecting it at all. I thought it was going to be a serial killer thing from the title and also from the way that it begins, but it was something different for him, so well done for that. So, okay, that brings me to the end of this then. It's been a long video, sorry, but that doesn't tie up the Richard Laymon, believe it or not, because I finally found a decently priced copy of Cuts on eBay, which is coming to me, and then I do plan on doing a review of the complete unedited version of The Woods Are Dark. So there'll be more of that to come, but my next video isn't going to be Laymon, it's going to be somebody else, a novel after these short stories. So thank you for watching this very long video if you did watch it to this point, and I'll be back soon with another video. Until then, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.